Bashar al-Assad inherited his father's totalitarian regime and left it and his country in ruins. A thuggish police state in a brutal repression turned war, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed and more than half the population fled their homes.
He'll be remembered as one of the most violent rulers in response to the uprisings that started in late 2010 in the Arab world. He'll also be remembered as the failing endpoint of the Assad dynasty that his father had started that lasted for over 42 years, but it collapsed under him.
Bashar al-Assad never expected to take over from his father. His older brother Basil was the heir apparent. Instead, Bashar trained as an ophthalmologist in London. Former Assad family insiders say he didn't have the right stuff to run Syria.
His brother Basil bullied him as a child. His father never gave him as much attention as Basil.
But a high-speed car crash killed Basil, and Bashar was brought back home to learn the family business. When President Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, Syria's elite pushed Bashar into the presidency, keeping 30 years of their own wealth, power, position and influence intact.
Hafez was a leader, the head of the entire regime, while Bashar never came close to that.
At first, the new president agreed to modest reforms and released hundreds of political prisoners. But that brief moment of optimism, dubbed the Damascus Spring, ended abruptly. A decade later, the regional upheaval known as the Arab Spring wouldn't be addressed as easily. Protests demanding change spread across Syria in early 2011. The regime cracked down, turning peaceful protest into slaughter. The UN found what it called massive evidence of war crimes, crimes against humanity, responsibility at the highest level of government, including the head of state. Assad, the deceptively gentle face of an increasingly desperate regime, denied responsibility in one of his rare encounters with a Western journalist.
They are not my forces. They are military forces belong to the government.
Okay, but you're
I don't own them. I'm president.
The chaos spawned countless local militias and opposition forces. In the mayhem, the ultra-violent Islamist group ISIS gained a temporary foothold, spewing its nihilistic terror over the border into Iraq. US and Iraqi forces confronted and ultimately crushed them, but didn't challenge Assad's brutal authority. Fearing the developing threat, the United States led a coalition to fight Assad's terrorist enemies for him, ISIS and al-Qaeda. Russia too joined the fight. Assad and his allies, Hezbollah from Lebanon and Iranian militia, were losing ground, committing more forces than any other country. With barbaric, internationally condemned ground and air assaults, Russia turned the tide in Assad's favour. But when Russia's forces went to war in Ukraine in 2022, the clock on Assad's rule began ticking down. By late 2024, his other main allies, Iran and Hezbollah, were blooded by over a year-long war with Israel. Assad's fortunes plummeted. Former al-Qaeda turned nationalist Islamists, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, surged out of their northern enclave, exploiting Assad's allies' weakness, overrunning the country. Within 2 weeks, Assad had fled to Russia, ending his family's half-century ruthless repression of the Syrian people. His life in exile begins, living in the shadow of fear. His heinous crimes will eventually catch up with him.